Tracking through theory. 5. The clefs. Although learning to play the bass requires us to read notes on the bass clef staff, it is also important to know how to read notes on the other staffs. This will help us understand harmony in music. We have learned that in order to identify notes on the staff's lines and spaces, we need a clef. It is the symbol that appears to the far left of every staff. Without the clef, we will not be able to tell which line or space represents which pitch in which octave. In this video, we will learn about the treble clef, the bass clef, and the C-Clefs. There are many musicians playing different instruments and have different voice types. Musicians read different clefs because each one corresponds to the range of pitches needed for a particular instrument or voice type. The higher instruments, like the flute and violin, or voice like the soprano, read the treble clef. The lower instruments, like the cello and bass, mainly read the bass clef. The violas use the alto clef. Pianists need both the treble and bass clef. And the bassoonist and cellist read both bass and tenor clefs. Let's start with the treble clef. Using the piano keyboard to illustrate, the treble clef is used for higher notes. These notes are usually played by pianist's right hand or by instruments like the violin, flute, oboe, and recorder. It is also used by voices like the soprano and mezzo-soprano. The treble clef can be used for the highest notes played by the bass, which sounds one octave lower. In the previous video, I mentioned the treble clef as the upper staff of the grand staff used for the keyboard. The treble clef is also known as a G-Clef. Why G? It sort of looks like a cursive G, and the end of the central curving line rests on the staff line G. That means this note is G. This G is a landmark note. You can see the letter name and the octave placement on the keyboard above the staff. With this G, you can figure out the rest of the notes on the treble clef staff. Going down from this G, counting backward, you will have F, E, D, and reaching the middle C, another landmark pitch. Please note that this C is the same C on the bass clef staff. And going up from G, counting forward, you will have A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and A. We have learned that these are ledger lines and that the middle C and the A at the top are landmark pitches. Once we know the middle C landmark pitch, we will be able to figure out the landmark pitches A3 and F3. And knowing the A5 landmark pitch, we will be able to figure out the landmark pitches C6 and E6. Remember that when we write notes lower or higher than the staff, we use short lines called ledger lines. For these ledger lines below the staff, these lines are drawn through the notes and they are never below the notes. For these ledger lines above the staff, these lines are drawn through the notes and they are never above the notes. As I have mentioned in my other video regarding bass notes, another way to identify the note names faster is to count in thirds. For the line notes of the treble clef staff, we have E, G, B, D, F. To memorize the names of the treble line notes, you may also use mnemonics. For example, every good boy deserves friends. Or every good bird does fly. Or every good bond drives fast. And for the space notes, counting in thirds from the first space note upwards, you get F, A, C, E, which spells space. That's easy to remember. Let me give you some examples of how half steps or semitones and whole steps or whole tones look like on the treble clef. From D to E, that's a whole step. From G sharp to A, that's a half step or semitone. I will use H to represent that. From B to C, we will get a half step or semitone. From C sharp to D sharp, that's a whole step or whole tone. From F to G flat, that's a half step or semitone. Let's do some exercises related to the treble clef. Exercise 1. Using the piano keyboard to help you, write the letter name and octave number for the pitches below. The first one is done for you. You may pause and work on this exercise or come back to it later. The answers are found in the description box below. Exercise 2. Identify each pair of pitches. The intervals for these pitches could be a half step or semitone, a whole step or whole tone, or neither. The first one is done for you. Like exercise 1, the answers are found in the description box below. You may pause and work on this exercise or come back to it later. Now, going on to the bass clef. The notes on the bass clef staff have been covered in detail in the previous Tracking Through Theory videos, namely number 2, the bass, number 3, the accidentals, and number 4, the piano keyboard. I've attached the links to these previous videos in the description box below. To review, here are the bass clef's line notes and space notes. Line notes G, B, D, F, A, and space notes A, C, E, and G. We have also learned the landmark pitches A1, C2, E2, C4, E4, and G4 on the bass clef staff. Here are the ledger lines landmark pitches. An alternative to using ledger lines is to use the Ottava Signs. This Ottava sign, the 8 with VA above the staff, means to play an octave higher. The 8V stands for octave, and the A stands for alta, which is Italian for above. The dotted line bracket just means to play the notes under the sign one octave above what is written. That means these 3 landmark pitches, C4, E4, and G4, are played one octave higher at C5, E5, and G5. And you can see how these notes are written on the treble clef instead of using the ledger lines. Once again, without the Ottava sign, and with the Ottava sign. Now, this Ottava sign, the 8 with the VB, beneath the staff means to play the notes an octave lower. We know that the 8V stands for octave. The B here stands for bassa, which is Italian for below. The dotted line bracket just means to play the notes above the sign one octave below what is written. That means these 3 landmark pitches, F3, A3, and C4, with the Ottava sign beneath them, means that these notes are to be played one octave lower, F2, A2, and C3. We can see how these notes are written on the bass clef staff. Once again, without the Ottava sign, and with the Ottava sign, let me give you some examples of how half steps or semitones and whole steps or whole tones look like on the bass staff. From F to G, that's a whole step or whole tone. From A sharp to B, we have a half step or semitone, represented by H. From C to D flat, that's a half step or semitone. From F sharp to G sharp, that is a whole step or whole tone. From A flat to B flat, we have a whole step or whole tone. Now, let's do some exercises related to the bass clef. Exercise 3. Identify each pair of pitches. The intervals for these pitches could be a half step or semitone, a whole step or whole tone, or neither. The first one is done for you. You may pause and work on this exercise or come back to it later. The answers are found in the description box below. Okay, moving on to the not-so-familiar C-Clefs. Knowing the treble clef and the bass clef is sufficient for the majority of the music out there. However, it is good to know that these C-Clefs exist and they appear mainly in orchestral and chamber music scores. A C-clef is a movable clef. This clef identifies where the middle C is by the point on the staff at which the two curved lines join together in the middle. The C-clef can be a soprano clef, a mezzo-soprano clef, an alto clef, a tenor clef, or a baritone clef. The alto clef and the tenor clef are the most common of the C-clefs. To read these clefs well, after figuring out where the C is, practice counting the lines and spaces in thirds. We know that the middle C will always be a line note. Let's do some exercises related to the C-clefs. Exercise 4. Identify the clef, then write the letter name for the pitches below. The first one is done for you. You may pause and work on this exercise or come back to it later. The answers are found in the description box below. Exercise 5. Identify the clef and then write the letter name for the pitches below. The first one is done for you. You may pause and work on this exercise or come back to it later. The answers are found in the description box below. Okay, let's play. What is the word? Can you guess these words? You may wish to pause the video and figure out the words before continuing. For the treble clef, the word is feed. For the bass clef, the word is gap. For the alto clef, the word is cade. For the tenor clef, the word is dad. Okay, let's draw. Although there are many music notation software available, it is important to learn how to notate music by hand. So far, I have been using mainly the whole notes or semi-briefs. Drawing notes other than the whole notes or semi-briefs require stems. Stems are these thin vertical lines attached to the note head. These lines can either extend below or above the note head. I will go into note values in more detail in a future video. For now, let's learn how to draw notes. When you draw note heads, make sure that they are oval-shaped rather than round. The top and bottom of a spaced note should just touch and fit nicely between the lines. For the line note, draw the line note such that the line cuts the note in the middle. Do not draw the note too small or too large. If you're drawing notes other than the whole notes or semi-briefs, you will need stems. As you can see, if a note lies below the middle line of the staff, its stem goes up on the right side of the note. If a note lies above the middle line of the staff, its stem goes down on the left side of the note head. A stem attached to a note on the middle line generally goes down. Also, when drawing the stem, the length of the stem from the top to the bottom should span about an octave. These stems and accidentals are drawn incorrectly. The accidentals come before the note head, which is the left of the main or oval part of the note. However, please note that when we say or write the letter names, the accidental goes after the letter name. Here, the ledger lines are drawn incorrectly. Now let's draw. Draw the notes 1. Draw the notes using hollow note heads and correctly notated stems. The first one is done for you. You may pause and work on this exercise or come back to it later. The answers are found in the description box below. Draw the notes 2. Draw the notes in the correct octave using hollow note heads with correctly notated stems, accidentals, and ledger lines. The first one is done for you. You may pause and work on this exercise or come back to it later. The answers are found in the description box below. I have included the following extra exercises in the description box below. That's it. That's all I have for the clefs.